Welcome to the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology podcast, sponsored by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. As a society, we have grown up with the use of certain pronouns to use that refer to a person based on a male or female framework. However, this is changing. A growing number of people are asking to be referred to not as a gender to which they are assigned, but in a way that aligns to their defined identity. HR leaders must be prepared to accommodate LGBTQ plus employees, candidates, or colleagues that have pronouns. If our applications, new hire paperwork, and employee onboarding doesn't include space for preferred or gender-neutral pronouns in the workplace, we are not just overlooking a segment of our community, we are opening our companies up to discrimination lawsuits. Today, we're talking about pronouns and workplace discrimination with Peyton Michelle. She's the Director of Operations at Louisiana Trans Advocates and Digital Marketing Assistant at RepCap. In July, Peyton became the first openly trans person to win an election in Louisiana when she was elected to the Democratic State Central Committee, or DSCC. Peyton, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Let's start with your background. What has your experience been as an openly trans person in the workplace?
Okay, yeah. So, I have an interesting background. I wasn't able to join a traditional workplace until I was around 22 because, no one wanted to hire me as a trans person, as someone that had, graduated high school and didn't really do much. But what I did do, was spend a lot of time volunteering for nonprofits around Louisiana, specifically Louisiana Trans Advocates. I really spent years of my life educating myself on advocacy, empowering myself to, move through the world confidently. And, even when I did get hired, I was recruited to my company by another transgender employee that already worked here, so I knew I would be safe. But my experience is completely an outlier in the world of my world of trans people, and I really am excited to talk to you more about that.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I don't want you to be an outlier. I don't want others to be an outlier. I want every person to have the exact same work experience that you're having, where you're welcomed into the workplace regardless of who you are. So thank you for kicking us off and being willing to have a conversation here.
Totally, yeah. I spent years of my life being prepared to be the person that had the conversations that we're about to have. So I'm incredibly grateful that you're giving me the opportunity to have it.
Well, let's kick things off. And I wanted to ask you, what would you like HR leaders to understand about inclusivity?
Yeah, so I really thought about this a lot in the last 24 hours prepping for this. And, there's a lot of things that I could say about policy, but I think the biggest things that I would like the kind of corporate HR world to know about inclusivity is that being inclusive doesn't necessarily mean just accommodating someone else's needs. It means integrating their needs into, the quote unquote system of your workplace. I can't speak for all trans people, but personally, I don't want to just be pacified. I don't want people to just be nice to me because I'm a trans person. I want this to be something that I want the respect to be embedded into the system that promotes connection and conversation in the workplace, so that all people that are not maybe cookie cutter or whatever feel respected in the workplace.
What can we in HR do to help our employees who may not know non-binary or trans people in their own lives be more comfortable with having conversations with things about pronouns and respectful behavior?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ways that people can really just dive into this is asking everyone, like in a workplace setting, for their pronouns. Ask everyone at the interview for their pronouns instead of just the people that look like they might have different pronouns that than they present as. Like I think this is like a blanket, like I just said. I think it comes down to like building this into the system. I think it can seem really redundant, maybe, to ask a bunch of people that identify as cisgender for their pronouns. But if we ask everyone, then everyone gets the opportunity to tell you if it differs, especially in the world today where, more and more people are exploring their gender identity and more people are realizing that they don't fit the gender construct that we all live in. And even though they might not walk into the building, ready to be like, I want these people to call me they, them pronoun, if someone asks them, they might be like, well, this is an open place. I would love for you to call me they, them. Or maybe they're trans and they want you to call them like a she or he. But I think hopefully that makes my point well enough.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you, because as we were having this conversation, you gave me some feedback because I asked you initially about preferred pronouns. Can you explain to me why using the term preferred pronouns isn't necessarily preferred?
Right. So I think the word preferred really implies that I have okay, so if I go by she, her pronouns personally, and if I were to tell you that I prefer she, her pronouns, that might imply to you that, you could get away with something else. But in reality, my pronouns are she, her. It's not an option. There is not a preference. It is just it is just kind of fact. It is what my pronouns are, is what I go by. It'd be like, having a name and someone is like, well, I would prefer to call you a different name. It's like, no, it's really weird. This is my name and I prefer my name.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing and the learning opportunity, because everything I'm reading, and when you hear other experts talk, some are saying preferred pronouns, but it totally makes sense what you're explaining and the why behind we should just say, hey, what pronouns would you like to be referred to? And just kind of start the conversation from there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It really does go down to like respecting everyone.
When we spoke before the podcast, you mentioned an experience you had while traveling for work that surprised you. Can you share that with our audience?
Yeah, this experience really changed my life when it came to pronouns. The experience of it. So I was traveling for Louisiana Trans Advocates for a conference, and I was in Fort Lauderdale, leaving to come home, going through TSA, which is a dreadful process for trans people already, with the body scanners. You walk up to the body scanner and they press a button that determines if you're whatever assigned sex you are, and sometimes it doesn't match. So it'll flag things, areas that, might not match. And for trans people, that means that we often get patted down in TSA. And in this instance, I was getting pat down. And the TSA agent, she asked me to step forward. She told me that she needed to pat me down. And I told her that I was transgender. And this changed my life. She looked at me and she said, my name is, so and so, and my pronouns are she, her. What are yours? And in that moment, I think like even my brain kind of broke a little bit because that it was the first time I'd ever been asked by a stranger that was cisgender what my pronouns were. And she of course then asked me if I was comfortable being pat down by her or a male coworker or whatever. But it really just came down to like she respected me enough to just ask me what I wanted. Even in like TSA, where they have problems, she was still willing to be very kind and ask people for my pronouns. And even though, she had to kind of grope me a little bit, it still was a very pleasant experience. And I was really grateful for that.
As pleasant as a pat down could be.
Exactly, exactly.
For those who are unaware, would you be willing to share what cisgender means?
Totally. Okay, so we talk about transgender people, and those are people that have decided that that they wanted to change the gender that they were previously. And cisgender people is basically just the opposite of that. It's just people that they did not change their gender, and their assigned sex at birth correlate.
Okay, so I would be considered cisgendered.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Most people in the world would probably consider themselves cisgender at this point in time.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Upskill HR and Ace the HR exam. Today we're talking about pronouns and discrimination with Peyton Michelle. Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Research credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more. Where have companies missed the mark for not asking for pronouns, and what impact do you think that can have on an employer brand?
I would really say that employers have missed the mark on a greater scale. Pronouns are obviously a really big deal to trans people, and they're a really big deal right now. They've definitely found themselves into like mainstream media. But what I would say really affects trans people to like a greater degree is employers not prioritizing trans people. This could come down to like some kind of a bathroom issue, but it also comes down to things like a healthcare plan that doesn't cover trans related care. You ask, what impact do you think that can have on an employer brand of just, maybe missing the mark? Um, and, I think it doesn't really affect an employer's brand, unfortunately, if they're transphobic or even just not super trans friendly. I know that's not a thing that I should probably say, but I really think it's the truth. I don't think people care enough about trans people yet. However, I can assure you that if you, as an employer, do discriminate against trans people, that all of the local trans people know about it, and there's a good chance that they've talked about it in some kind of Facebook group or whatever, and maybe like a statewide organization hears about it. Employers' employment has failed trans people like across the board. Every step of the process fails trans people in some kind of a way because it's so complex.
What is the most common misconception employers make it? What is the most common misconception employers make when it comes to non-binary and trans persons?
Earlier, I talked about the idea of accommodation versus integration of, trans people into the workplace. And I think a really common misconception that cis people in general make is that trans people assume or want some kind of special attention. I hear a lot of cisgender people assume that trans people want our own bathroom, that we want this or that, when in reality, we just want to use the normal bathroom. We just want to feel normal for our entire lives. We've been outcasted, we didn't feel normal, all of these things. After our transition, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but during our transition, we just kind of go into a place where we're just trying to feel normal. And I think if employers can think about that when they're trying to tackle these issues about, uh, relating to trans people or gender nonconforming people, I think if they just try to think like, how do I just normalize this? How do I take the stigma and the tabooness away from this? Um, how do I make my other employees not look at this gender nonconforming person and think that they're different? How do I show them that this person is normal and you should just treat Jeffrey like Jeffrey?
You're an elected official in the state of Louisiana as of July, and you're the first openly trans person to be elected to a government position in the state. What has the experience been like for you?
The experience has been really great from my perspective. I'm super grateful for it. And I say my perspective because I've really learned how to tune out, I'm just going to call it the haters. Here in south of Louisiana, where I live, we talk about like the local news channel comments, and we kind of describe them as like the worst of where we live. And while I didn't read the news station comments for all of the news articles all of the interviews that I did for my, historic win, a bunch of people apparently really tore into me. But like I said, I didn't read it. Even after my win, folks within the party, my DSCC counterparts, called me and misgendered me, or they misgendered me behind my back, sometimes even purposefully. It hasn't been all roses and sunshine, but I will say that I'm loving it and I'm having a great time. And it has definitely empowered me to reach higher.
Well, I am excited for you, and I appreciate you stepping out and making this decision to be the first. And I think it's a hard job to be the first for anything, and you're going to set an example for thousands of people, maybe millions of people moving forward. And I love that, and I love that about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Trans visibility is critical, in my opinion,
And that's why we're doing this interview, right?
right? Totally.
How should HR leaders approach education around transgender rights and inclusivity in our workplaces?
About a year ago, a colleague of mine from Louisiana Trans Advocates and I did a presentation, much like one of these presentations would be like, for a group of professors at a local community college. Um, and it was organized and attended by the assistant dean of the college. We were really excited. Really did have a great presentation, and the people that attended, I think, really did get a lot from it. But I will say that I think only about 10 professors attended. And this was a larger college. There are drastically more than 10 professors there. But the problem became that even though the assistant dean of the college was involved in promoting this meeting and this education in his organization, it was still scheduled at a time that classes were actively going on, so, professors that wanted to attend could not. It wasn't a mandatory meeting of any kind. It really hindered the education because people didn't get it. But I will say that there were people in that meeting that had never met a trans person, and they left the room in a much different state of mind than they showed up. In many ways, I really do believe that trans visibility goes a long way. I don't know the specific statistics, but I remember a majority of cis people don't know a trans person. Like, they don't have a friend or family member that is transgender. And that means that, like, this idea can be really mystified to them. I know a lot of people that believe being trans is some kind of like political statement, and it's really just not. We're just living our lives. And I think for people that have never met a trans person, meeting a trans person, it can really uproot the beliefs that they had already, settled upon, whether it had been like consciously or subconsciously. And I think it can really show folks that we truly, truly are just people that are living our lives in a slightly different way than everyone else. And we're not trying to hurt people or, have a bathroom monopoly or something. We're just living our lives to the best of our ability. Just respect people.
Well, Peyton, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Totally. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for having me because this is an incredibly important conversation that people need to have. And it will continue to be swept under the rug by people because it is not a fun conversation to have, but it really needs to be have. Like having this conversation will and can save lives in the future. It will allow people to be employed. It will allow people to like their jobs. All of this crazy mystifying things that just doesn't happen these days. So yes, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Peyton. I appreciate you for taking the time. Are you loving the Workology podcast? Our Workology community reaches over 600,000 HR leaders every single month. Want to be a sponsor? Reach out to us at workology.com/advertising. When someone requests to be addressed by a specific pronoun, we should absolutely, yes, absolutely, accommodate that request. However, that is the lowest possible bar. In order to be truly inclusive, we must be able to work with our managers, our team leaders, our company leaders, and employees to educate them on inclusivity and the appropriate use of pronouns in the workplace. Normalizing working with people who are LGBTQ+ isn't just about legal compliance. It's about being the right and respectful thing to do. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to have Peyton on the podcast today to talk with us. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who is tired of the status quo. My name is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to our previous podcast episodes.